Welcome everyone. A very, very warm welcome once again to our seventh seminar in the series of our seminars on AI. So a very good morning to all our visitors from the US. I saw some registrations from the University of Atlanta. A very good afternoon to everyone joining in from UK and Europe. And a very good evening to everyone joining in from India, Southeast Asia, and a late good evening to those joining in from New Zealand and Australia. So we are about to begin our seminar on the digital future for business and society, perspectives on AI challenges and opportunities. This entire series of 15 seminars is hosted jointly by Professor Yogesh Dwivedi from the Emerging Markets Research Center, EMaRC, Department of Business, School of Management, Swansea University, UK, and Professor Ramakrishnan Raman, Director of Symbiosis Institute of Business Management, Pune, and Dean Faculty of Management at Symbiosis International University. This entire seminar series is supported by the Center for Technology, Innovation, Management and Enterprise, the University of Kent, UK, Digital Marketing and Analytics Special Industry Group, Academy of Marketing, Grenoble IAE-Graduate School of Management, a Grenoble INP School of the University of Grenoble, Alpes, Swansea iLab, Innovation Lab at Swansea University, the E-Business and E-Government Special Industry Group, British Academy of Management, and the UK Academy for Information Systems. To tell you a little bit about this seminar series, this is inspired by various perspectives on artificial intelligence and its transformative potential presented in a recent perspective article by Dwivedi et al. 2019. Artificial intelligence undoubtedly offers a transformative potential for the augmentation and potential replacement of human tasks and activities within a wide range of industrial, intellectual, even social applications. The pace of change for this new AI-driven technological age is staggering, with new breakthroughs in algorithmic machine learning, autonomous decision-making, creating new opportunities for continued innovation. The impact of AI could be significant, with industries and sectors ranging from agriculture, finance, healthcare, manufacturing, retail, supply chain, logistics, utilities, all potentially could be disrupted by the onset of AI technologies. This seminar series on the digital future for business and society, perspectives on AI challenges and opportunities, will present to you various perspectives from a number of leading expert speakers to highlight both the opportunities and challenges posed by the rapid emergence of AI. Allow me to introduce our esteemed speaker for today, Professor Rony Medaglia from the Department of Digitalization, Copenhagen Business School, Denmark. Professor Rony is a professor with special responsibilities in the Department of Digitalization at the Copenhagen Business School in Denmark. Professor Rony's research focuses on digitalization in the public sector from the perspectives of public policy, digital service provision, and citizen engagement. He is the president of the Special Interest Group on e-government of the Association for Information Systems and an associate editor of Government Information Quarterly. His talk today is titled as Artificial Intelligence in the Public Sector, Opportunities and Challenges Ahead. Professor Rony, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Bhattacharya. I'm very honored to participate in this series of very interesting seminars. Thank you also to Professor Raman and to Professor Dwivedi, who made this event happen. I'm very excited about sharing with you some of the research I've been working on about artificial intelligence in public sector in particular. So the idea is that I will give some inputs for around half an hour, 40 minutes maximum. And then I look forward to having some discussion and engage with some of you about this topic that is not only exciting and interesting, but also has so many different perspectives that are now competing. So I will start by sharing my screen, and please let me know if it is working for you. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
So, as was anticipated, the title of my talk today is about AI adoption in the public sector, opportunities and challenges ahead. You already introduced me, so very briefly, I work in Copenhagen now for around 13 years, where I'm a professor with special responsibilities. But I'm originally from Italy, where I got my doctoral degree, and then I studied in England at Sussex University as well. The type of research I conduct in general is about digital government. I have a political science background, but I also now, throughout my professor career, I have been engaging with the area of information systems. So within digital government, the topics I'm working right now are artificial intelligence in government, which is what I will talk about today. But I also am involved in other different projects, in particular about blockchain and its role in sustainable development. And I've also been working on government and how the public sector can use social media. Of course, if you want to know more about my research and my teaching, you are very welcome to check my website that you can see at this URL address or contact me by email. So the first question that I think it's relevant tackling is, why should we care about AI? Why is it important? Isn't it just another fad technology that there's so much buzz around? In my opinion, AI is a game changer, or has the potential to be a game changer for a number of reasons. The most important one comes back to the reflection of philosopher Michael Polanyi, who already back in the 70s developed a reflection whereby if we look at the range of human activities, the way humans work are that we as humans know more than we can tell. This has been labeled as Polanyi's paradox. What does it mean in particular? If you think about the way you tie your shoes, or riding a bicycle, or just walking, you will realize very easily that these are tasks that are extremely complex. Nevertheless, we do it very naturally. Now, when prompted in order to be able to describe these actions, we would be at very much difficulty. A test to do this would be to try to explain to someone that has never rode a bicycle how to ride a bicycle in a way that this will be effectively be a transfer of knowledge, at the end of which this person would be able to ride a bicycle. You realize very easily that this is impossible. The problem is that all the individual steps to ride a bicycle, or to walk, or to tie your shoes are very hard for us as humans to translate into discrete instructions. Now, when we go to the digital area, this has been a challenge since the invention of computers, because computers are machines that execute instructions. So we are able to automate only tasks that can be described as discrete instructions. As a result, you cannot have a robot proficiently ride a bicycle or walk. Now, with artificial intelligence, for the first time, we're able to break this barrier. The reason is because artificial intelligence does not require a set of discrete instruction ex ante, but is able to learn through trial and error. So the self-learning capabilities of artificial intelligence are the ones that now allow us to automate tasks that until now we could not automate. Example of these are very popular examples, such as artificial intelligence and machine learning, learning how to beat a video game or simulate walking, or some spectacular case as coming out with new strategies with games that before we thought were only the realm of human engineer creativity, such as AlphaGo. Now, having established why AI has the potential to be a game changer in general automation, why should we care about AI in the public sector? The answer is that unlike traditional office automation, AI does not operate on a pre-programmed if-then logic, but it can learn. And the ability to learn is peculiarly apt into public decision-making, where you have variables that are continuously changing, and you need to take into account the societal context. So in that sense, artificial intelligence applications can be argued to be ideal to be used in a public sector context and in a government decision-making context. The background here leads to the fact that now we are witnessing a booming in artificial intelligence applications in the public sector. So we go from more simple ones. So for instance, this is an example of how the United States Army is experimenting with chatbots that are AI empowered so that they can engage with prospective recruits and direct them to the right sources of information. These chatbots, unlike previous generation of chatbots, become more and more refined as more data is fed into them. The more human interactions they have, the better they become at interacting in a natural language. But these applications can be also applied to more complex decision-making. This example here is an AI machine learning system applied to targeting hygiene inspections in restaurants. So by mining text of reviews in popular review platforms of restaurants such as Yelp, the system is able to identify patterns of keywords and expressions in these reviews that are associated with a higher likelihood of the restaurant not matching the hygiene required standards. As a result, government can then save resources into targeting only restaurants that have likelihood to not pass the hygiene test. Now, this on paper is a very, opens up a lot of potentials. But as researcher, we started asking ourselves, what are the challenges of AI adoption in the public sector? And in order to start mapping these challenges of this emerging field, one of the focus that I had personally was the public healthcare. This is a sector where there's a lot of public investment. And of course, the stakes for a wrong decision are much higher than in other cases. So in this research results that I'm going to share with you, I try to identify what are perceived challenges of AI adoption in the public healthcare sector. The case we've been looking into is the adoption of artificial intelligence in a number of hospitals in the People's Republic of China. The AI system used here is the very famous IBM Watson Health. This system is a collection of algorithms that is able to parse both structured and unstructured data. For instance, CT scans or results of medical trials, and based on those is able to provide the doctors with a number of treatments recommended, in these cases for cancer, recommended based from the most recommended to the least recommended. In other words, the system continuously scans the state-of-the-art of scientific literature on cancer treatments, and together with data from patients, is able to match personalized treatments that in theory are more accurate than what any human doctor could provide. So we wanted to understand what are the challenges in the eyes of the different stakeholders of the public sector that are involved. So on the one hand, we talked to hospital managers and doctors that were on the first line using this system. Then we also talked to the IT, to the technology vendors, and we also talked to government policymakers that are involved at both national and local level with the rolling out of this system. The data collection involves a number of interviews, countless hours of participating in meetings, and also policy document analysis on both general healthcare, on technology, and about technology in healthcare in particular. So I'm going to share with you, without going too much into detail, some conversation starters about interesting results that we got. So the first class of challenges that were highlighted were identified by government policymakers. We call these country-specific patients' disease profile. Here's the challenge that they have identified. One of our interviewees from the government official says, because of the racial differences between China and Western countries such as the US, the cause of a disease is different. So for example, Western countries have more vascular-related diseases, while China has more hepatic diseases, meaning diseases related to liver. So the problem here, according to government officials, is the fact that the system in itself is only as good as the data that it is trained with. So the issue with Watson is has been trained obviously mostly with US-based data from US patients. Because these patients have different profiles, the accuracy of the treatments that it recommends are very good for American patients, but they're not as good for Chinese patients because the typical Chinese patient profile has different characteristics. In particular, the incidence of liver diseases is higher. Another interesting finding that we have identified here is related to ethical challenges as identified in particular both by government officials and by the doctors in this case. These ethical challenges are related to the key element of trust. Here is what one of the doctors said. When talking about patients' reaction to IBM Watson, they say the patients have no idea about Watson. They will think, why do I need a machine to look at my problem? I prefer an expert doctor. Here, the trust issue is related to the fact that the end user, in this case, the patient, cannot trust a output of a machine as much as he or she would trust the output of a human doctor. So this is a key challenge when we talk about public services, because public services in this case are not generally just as commercial service, but they have to earn the perception of legitimacy and trust that is expected from a service that is provided by a public sector agency. Another very interesting finding was related to the cluster of challenges that we call political, legal, and policy related. This is linked to what we said before, and it's related to the lack of rules of accountability. So here by accountability, we really mean legal instruments to link the responsible people to the outcome of the decisions that are enabled by artificial intelligence. One of the doctors told us, when we use Watson, we must have at least 5 doctors to work together with Watson, because this is required by Chinese government regulation. So these 5 doctors signed the report. Now, this really gives us a heavy burden, the doctors say. In other words, here we have a mismatch between what the AI system can do and, on the other hand, what the regulation still requires. The 5 doctors are legally responsible for the decision that is taken, even though it is the AI system that provides the main input. So you have a mismatch here that creates some discomfort on the side of the service providers, in this case, the doctors in the public hospital. Another category of challenges is organizational and managerial challenges. Here we have the very prominent element of organizational resistance to data sharing. This is nothing new for any IT researcher, obviously. We know that organizations tend to resist to change, and many of the times they resist to sharing data because data equals power. So here the issue is about how hospitals should share data about patients, but they don't. The quote from one of the hospital managers says that the data is in a hospital, but the IT vendors cannot get the data that they need to train the system. For example, Alibaba, which is a very famous e-commerce company in China, is now entering the health industry. But hospitals only allow Alibaba to access data of outpatients, not data of inpatients. So as a result, the IT firms cannot get core data from hospital, and therefore the system cannot be trained properly. So in this case, the dysfunctional outcome of the AI system is not due to technology itself, but it's completely due to, in this case, organizational resistance reason. This is the old lesson that we learn from decades of IT studies, that most of the times the reason for success or failure of some system has nothing to do with technology, but all to do with organizational choices and management culture. Talking about data, one of the data challenges that is related to technological challenge is what we call algorithm opacity. What is algorithm opacity? Well, the metaphor here that is used by many respondents is the one of black box. The doctors say, when it comes to AI, it is a black box. It's not like carrying out experiments where we can see the process. Artificial intelligence is under learning, but we don't know what is wrong when it has some problems. So as a result, this is very dangerous. So the black box problem is related to the fact that algorithms in artificial intelligence, the more complex they become, the less explainable and therefore interpretable they become. Now, this is a particularly vicious issue when we talk about public sector, because public sector, by essence, needs to be accountable and needs to have the legitimacy vis-a-vis the end users, which is the citizens, in this case, the patients. Also, there's a problem of correction of policy. If a policy goes astray because it is based on AI input, then if we don't know what is the reason of the negative outcome, we're not able to correct it. So algorithm opacity is emerging as one of the challenges that need to be tackled when we talk about AI. Now, it was very interesting to carry out this project about artificial intelligence in public sector in China, but in no way this is only a Chinese problem or a local problem. It is a global phenomenon. I'm involved together with the European Commission in the work of the project called AI Watch. In the AI Watch project, we are monitoring all European Union member states' initiatives in order to build a database of best practices and learn from their mistakes. You can see at this URL address, or also scanning this QR code, the latest report that we have published under the umbrella of the European Commission about the status of the AI Watch project. We have now collected a total of 230 cases, including both 27 European Union members, but also Switzerland, Norway, and the UK. While details of the mapping are available in the report, I would like to point out to you a number of key findings. The first one is that general public services are the area in which AI is mostly used at in European Union countries at both local and central level. The second one is health, unsurprisingly, followed by economic affairs. Around a third of the cases are implemented at local and city level. This is a very stimulating area that is overlapping with the decade-long initiatives now regarding smart cities in Europe. The technologies that are mostly employed are chatbots, but there are also a lot of cases about predictive analytics, computer vision, and in general, expert rules-based systems. One of the lessons learned from this initial mapping is that AI often enables only incremental change, because it's not accompanied by significant organizational reforms. So here are some cases that I would like to share with you that I think shed light on a lot of the advantages that AI is having in the public sector in the European Union, but also some of the challenges. In the city of Copenhagen, where I live now, a rather successful example of AI application is the project called Corti. Corti is an algorithm that analyzes audio input. It is used by the Emergency Medical Dispatch Center of Copenhagen to recognize the likelihood of cardiac arrest from the voice of phone calls, emergency phone calls from prospective patients. In other words, this system is able to identify with very high accuracy from the voice of the phone call whether the patient is likely to have a heart attack. So as a result, the human factor is enhanced because the medical dispatcher can more accurately detect and consequently inform medical staff. In Spain, more recently, with the COVID-19 epidemic, during the summer, AI has been used to contain the possible spread of the virus in the beaches that were getting more and more crowded as the country was slowly reopening after the first wave of infections. So AI here, together with a number of sensors, was able to monitor levels of attendance at beaches, but also predict them. And this prediction allowed the police forces to avoid crowds and therefore minimize the risks of possible COVID-19 new infections. In the metro of Paris, similarly, in this case, image recognition have been used in order to try to recognize passengers that would not comply with the mandate regulation to wear face masks on trains. So using input data from CCTV cameras, this system was able to identify and enable to the police forces to intervene in cases where passengers were not using face masks. Now, this is one of the cases where the project had to be terminated because of a number of challenges. The most important one here was ethical concerns from the principle of privacy of the individuals that were monitored, but also legal concerns because given the nature of this system and its infringement of privacy, there was the impossibility for the individual citizens to contest the results of the AI system. In other words, there were no legal tools for the citizens to appeal this decision in case they were confident that they were indeed wearing the mask, so they were not infringing the regulation. So these challenges led to the termination of the project. So here we have one of the cases where there was no successful outcome. Similarly, there has been a lot of media press coverage and public opinion discussion about a project using AI in one of the municipalities in Denmark. The system here was supposed to create a targeting of potentially vulnerable children within families in the region. So the AI system would mine data from different sources, such as employment status, healthcare, benefit provision, social welfare benefit provision, and machine learning would be able to identify families where there will be a higher likelihood of children in a vulnerable situation. So the project has started being rolled out, but it had to be halted due to a huge number of criticisms. They were similarly to the Paris Metro case related to privacy and to legal concerns. So summing up, what are the potential benefits of government? We know by now that artificial intelligence has the potential of relieving public servants from repetitive tasks. Repetitive tasks are the ones that are most easily automated and where the machine has a much more higher accuracy than the one of humans. So from a public management point of view, you're able to remove these public service servants from these tasks that are of lower added value and position them into tasks where they have a much higher added value. One of the outcomes of this is also to improve public service accuracy. So we saw in the example of healthcare, for instance, how doctors now can potentially provide cures or treatments for cancer that are much more accurate than the ones that they would be able to do by themselves if they had to be on top of the cutting edge of the scientific literature just by themselves. The fact that the machine learning and AI systems are able to provide different options that are more objectively founded in data mining also could hinder the corruption of caseworkers. When the computer says no, it is much harder for bribing, for instance, to circumvent the outcome of a public service decision. Now, regarding potential risks, we do see that there are some challenges ahead that are worth discussing both between the researcher and the practice community. The first one that I identify is the one of bias and discrimination. As we said, the outputs of artificial intelligence are only as good as the data that is introduced in the system. Now, think about this case. In the United States, there has been this initiative called the Data-Driven Justice Initiative. The government tried to tackle one of the age-old problems of the justice system in the United States, which is the massive incarcerated population. Now, this AI system would be able to recommend which prison inmates are safer to lead to home arrest instead of being incarcerated based on a number of data points related to their profile. Now, while this system over time has learned to become more and more refined in its outcome, the result was unfortunately that it did create some bias and discrimination. The problem is the following. In this specific case, data about sentencing of African Americans was consistently biased on the race variable. Now, artificial intelligence is very good at identifying patterns and then recommend decisions based on those patterns. But if the data input is already biased, it will not correct the bias. Actually, it will make it even worse. So as a result, the system went under heavy criticism because its output were consistently biased against African Americans in making the decisions on which inmates to put to home arrest instead of keeping as prison inmates. In general, this has starting to identify discourses on how artificial intelligence actually could lead to what some call a digital dystopia. The vulnerable, instead of being empowered, will become even more vulnerable because they will be discriminated against, for instance, in the provision of benefits from the welfare state. So the algorithms ultimately have the potential to punish the poor unless we act upon it. The second big cluster of challenge that I identify is the one of lack of explainability. This is the metaphor of the black box that we talked about before. If we don't know what happens between our introduction of input data so until the output decision, we're not able to explain to citizens why a specific decision is given. For instance, why a specific welfare benefit is discontinued for a citizen. Moreover, if AI works as a black box, not even the programmers of the algorithms are able to identify why a specific decision has been taken, the public sector agency are then by definition incapable of correcting their decisions in case the decision ends up providing negative impacts. The third one is one that many tend to overlook, but is actually at the base of a lot of erosion of societal value. We call these filter bubbles. Now, think about social media discourses and the news consumption on social media. We know by now that algorithms that are behind social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, or others are very good at feeding content based on the preferences of each individual. From a commercial point of view, this is very good because it allows advertisement targeting, for instance. But from a societal and also from a democratic stance point of view, this can have disastrous results. The result of feeding only content about news, for instance, based on personal profile is the fact that eventually each individual will live in their own bubble with their own reality, and there will be no more overlap and common ground on which citizens can then reach a common decision and have what we expect to be a healthy and democratic confrontation between different values in society. So ultimately, this is also an AI potential risk. The fact that with filter bubbles, societies become more and more fragmented, more and more balkanized, and therefore eventually institutions will not be able to maintain them together in a healthy way. So summing up, here are my conversations started for you today. I think that artificial intelligence in the public sector, given its nature, has amazing potentials, mainly related to relieving public servants from repetitive tasks so that you can allocate them to added value. Number two, improving the accuracy of public services. And number three, avoiding corruption of caseworkers by removing a lot of the discretion that they usually have. However, these benefits come with some risks that we need to mitigate. The first one is the risk that AI will create more discrimination and more bias than what we already have. The second one is that we are unable to explain, and therefore, as public service agency managers, we are unable to, number one, provide an explanation to citizens that are target of a service, and number two, correct the course of action of public decision-making in case it goes astray. And last but not least, there's the wider discourse of AI-powered filter bubbles. When algorithms govern the information distribution in the public sphere, there's the risk that we create more and more isolated communities that eventually will fragment our society to a point that is not recoverable anymore. I would like to thank you for this opportunity, and I really look forward to discussing with you some of these issues and to continue our conversation both today, but also in the future by email or in other occasions like this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Rony. Thank you very much indeed for a very lucid and balanced narrative about the use of AI in public space. Professor Yogesh, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's very nice narrative in terms of, giving both what it will bring and what risk or challenges it may pose. So, just thinking of it in terms of repetitive task, what Rony mentioned, that it will benefit public sector to basically remove people from repetitive tasks so that they can focus on strategic issues. Wouldn't it also bring challenge of unemployment and other issues in public sector, Rony? What is your view on this one?
Yes, that's a very good point. I think especially in the early stages of this new AI spring that we are experiencing now, the first reaction has been AI is going to take our jobs. It's going to disrupt so many of different activities, not only in the public sector, but also in the private sector. Think about bus driver or other type of workers that have a more repetitive type of task. So the question always comes, what is this going to be replaced with? So my personal opinion is, let's look at history of technological innovation. This usually happens when you have the introduction of new cutting-edge technologies. So we do know that when the automobile came about, obviously there were a lot of protests from horse carriage riders that were very violent, and there was a debate worth having in society about how to retrain these people. Nevertheless, now we don't ride a horse carriage anymore to go to work, but this technology has been supplanted. And as a result, some of the jobs that have been destroyed by the technology have been then replaced by new jobs that many of the times require a higher level of skills. So without, being a future teller myself, I would say there's no reason why this is not the case anymore. What we need to learn from the past is to accompany these paradigm shift and make sure it doesn't explode with discontent. And we need to be proactive towards this shift as opposed to reactive. It's very hard to do because technology changes very quickly, but the keywords here are obviously retraining and education and a whole societal level investment into being able to manage, govern, and steer the technological change.
Okay, I think we have a question on the chat box. Ashish Prakash is asking, would ordinary users would be interested in intricacies of algorithmic decision making with transparency, i.e. how a decision has been reached? Rather, they might be interested in a very simple explanation that they can easily comprehend. How can the developers balance this trade-off between algorithmic transparency and the complexity of explanation?
Excellent question. And my immediate reaction is absolutely the latter that you say, meaning the end users do not, our goal should not be for the end users to know the intricacies, the technical intricacy of the algorithms, but there has to be an element of what we call interpretability as opposed to pure explainability. There has to be a linguistic mediation between the technical element of the algorithm and the value-based language of explaining the reason for a public decision. Is this easy to do? No. But is it possible to do? We will need to find out, and I think that should be definitely the goal. So from a practical point of view, what does this mean? It means that in training the new generation of computer engineers, computer scientists, we need to bring together multidisciplinary knowledge from both the STEM sciences and the social and humanities, so that a mutual enriching of vocabulary and of contextual awareness that will allow us to exactly do this, be able to explain to the end user in a way that is both accurate but also understandable. If we fail in doing this, there will be more and more of the negative outcome of artificial intelligence, because there will be less and less trust from the end users and less understanding from the developer's point of view of the ultimate goal of these tools.
Thank you, Professor Rony. There is a comment from Euripides Lucas. So Euripides is saying, concerning bias discrimination, if a specific group of people, example, racial or income related or geographic, based on previous data has really more illegal activity, which is the problem of predicting for them high probability of law violation in the future. And he says that's the reality.
Yeah, very good question. And I'm very glad to hear from my colleague and friend, Euripides. So I see this as two separate issues. So one issue is simply biased data. So the example I made before about the incarceration data linked to decision to put to home arrest, the issue there is that the data was actually biased. So judges tend to be more harsh towards minorities than they are towards other parts of society. Now, the problem here with AI is that obviously the machine learning system is not aware of this, so it doesn't correct of this, but actually makes it worse. So that's one point. The other point is, as Euripides was saying, what if we have data that is unbiased, but however will lead to decisions that are more punitive for a specific group? How do we act upon that? And to me, that is really the most difficult part to tackle. And one of the strategies to overcome this is not to delegate the entirety of these decisions to the pure AI system, but to have what we call different degrees, going from human in the loop to AI-assisted human decision. Because public sector decisions are always also political decisions, the value-based element of the political decision has to come from a political deliberation that obviously cannot be processed by the AI system. Now, where the balance lies there, it is an object of debate and discussion, but to me, this is a clear indication that we should not move towards complete delegation of key decisions to AI system.
Thank you, Professor Rony. Professor Yogesh, you had wanted to say something.
Yeah, I mean, Rony, you mentioned that you have collected number of cases from Europe, I believe. You have gathered details about them. So it would be really interesting for all of us to know that, of course, any sensitive thing you don't have to mention, but it would be interesting to know what kind of application currently they are making in Europe, and if it has any effectiveness or any benefit to the end users. be it citizens or whoever it is. So obviously, just few of examples will really helpful for all of us to know that things are going on and happening in the public sector.
Yes. Yeah, very good point. I'm very excited about this ongoing project. Obviously, this is not a project I am owning or leading myself, but I'm part of a larger team with the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, where we are at the first stages of doing these mapping exercises. So I think personally, some of the most interesting cases are the ones that during the mission. So for instance, the core T system of heart attack detection here in Copenhagen, but also the municipality in Spain that used AI for COVID spread containment, and other projects such as the image recognition in the Paris metro. I will be glad to share again the link to the full report. Going to the other question that you had about the specific technology, what we find here is that there's a preponderance of, you could say, relatively more elementary AI technology, such as chatbots. There's a lot of experimentation with chatbots, and we didn't yet collect data on why this is the case, but my personal interpretation is that these are relatively low-risk applications, and they are also applications that the citizens are already familiar with, so that they can be introduced with less stakes in case things go wrong. But on the other hand, within the framework of the General Data Protection Regulation, the EU GDPR, that the European Union is really making sure it's enforced in this case, there are sandboxes of different types. So chatbots are not the only ones, but we also have image recognition, and we have analytics of data that are processed through algorithms, as we saw with the infamous example of this municipality in Denmark that were targeting specific families based on database of their demographics and welfare services. So there is a long tail where you have chatbots, image recognition, and then you have very big number of technologies with very few cases associated to those.
Very interesting, Professor. You should mention AI-assisted public or government decision making. So some time back, I read a use case where the British police is using predictive analytics and AI to actually predict the likelihood of crimes occurring in certain clusters of populations. And finally, they hone down to the level and the quality of lighting in those areas, which then led them to increase the lighting and also increase their beat patrolling based on the what the AI was actually suggesting. And I believe that led to a control of the crime rate in certain areas. This was maybe about 3 or 4 years ago.
Yes, interesting. That sounds very similar to other projects that I encountered.
So we have a question from Annabelle Gutierrez. So Annabelle says, most people use AI use cases implying advanced AI techniques, especially for marketing purposes. However, many AI applications are rule-based compared to those using advanced algorithms that learn. Would you consider that the aforementioned ethical issues arise from the latter, those that use machine learning?
Very good point. I think there is a difference between these. For instance, issues such as privacy are also present in rule-based systems because they are ultimately data management issues rather than AI issues per se. Other ethical issues, such as the black box and the problem of explainability and interpretability, I think they're more poignant when we talk about AI systems strictly, because with self-learning systems, it's much harder for both developers and let alone end users to explain the link between data input and decision output compared to rule-based systems, because by definition in rule-based systems, there's a human that introduced those rules ex ante. So that's a very good question. I think there is a difference between these two, and this difference needs to be taken into account. Also, let me pinpoint another thing, that what we observe is that in many cases, for branding reasons or marketing reasons, or also to collect, to attract fundings, just rule-based systems are pitched as artificial intelligence, even though strictly they're not.
Thank you, Professor Rony. There's another question from Karine Dominguez Perry. So Karine mentions, in the potential benefits of AI, you highlighted service accuracy and improvements of efficiency. In addition, is there also a business model opportunity for the public sector with AI? I am notably thinking about the use of open data with other types of data. Do you have any examples of municipalities or countries using AI for improving public finance?
Very good question. I very much agree. I think, since we are in the early stages of AI diffusion in the public sector, we see that there's a lot of trying to pick the lowest hanging fruits, which are the efficiency gains. So you're able to do the same thing cheaper and faster. So instead of having a human at the complaint desk, you replace that with a chatbot, which costs less and maybe it's more accurate. The next step will be how to introduce digital transformation to the public sector. So how to create new services and also quote unquote new business models. I think this is something that is emerging now because we are entering this second or more mature stage of application of AI in the public sector after this trial and error stage. And I see more and more cases of these at least being planned. I'm not sure about being rolled out yet.
Thank you. Yes, please, Professor Yogesh.
Yeah, I mean, just to add that, I was reading an article yesterday from MIT Solon Management Review, and the article has argued that they studied large number of projects even in private sector, and majority of them were basically for efficiency gain. So for tactical and operational efficiency, hardly any actually has dared to use AI for strategic decision making or strategic level of issues. So, and one of the recommendation of that article was that the actual and real benefit of AI should be only achievable if they actually start moving towards strategic level decision making. Now, that's the thing that we are saying, but the most of the time, if you look at also, people argued that we shouldn't be doing that actually. We shouldn't be taking AI and applying for strategic purposes. For example, you gave the example of doctors where AI was making decision, but then 5 doctors has to sign it. So even government regulations and organizational regulations are as such that they wouldn't even believe what AI is actually saying. So it's quite a kind of paradox at the moment because of the uncertainty and risk and unseen effect, obviously, of this technology. So let's see how things go in the next 5 to 10 years. Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think this is one of the key challenges ahead. And my personal opinion is that, number one, it will not be an all or nothing approach. We need to find that sweet spot that is very context dependent, depending on the policy area, depending on the cultural context, the national context, the regulation context. So I think that's one. So for instance, when people talk about AI and strategy, should we use AI for strategy or not? Again, probably it will not be an all or nothing approach. It will always depend on what the strategy is for. And then if you want to reduce discrimination, if that's your strategy, then you can use AI to do that. If you want to just make sure you're able to fire as many of your employees as possible, then you can use AI. I think it would be a very nuanced, and it's very fascinating to be in a stage of the evolution of this technology in the public sector where there's so many possibilities out there, and we are still in time to steer this super tanker in the direction that we want as a society.
Absolutely, absolutely. And perhaps there is also a quest to get the low-hanging fruit. And like Professor Yogesh rightly mentioned, a lot of these are tactical. And I recall another very interesting use case from the government of Dubai, who's implementing blockchain and AI in areas like granting of licenses, immigration, accounting and finance, typically areas which lend themselves to rule-based decision making, and thereby then give them a savings. The number I read was like $3 billion a year is the quantum of saving. But it's that quest for let's display results and outcomes, and possibly over a period of time they might move to higher outcomes.
Absolutely. I think, I'm working also now on a number of blockchain projects. And as any other technology like AI, it really teaches you as a researcher that these technological choices ultimately are context-based choices. So, there's a lot of talk of blockchain as a technology that bypasses the need for trust. So in very low trust societies, then you would have fantastic applications of those. But for instance, in Denmark, which is usually identified as a high trust society, then blockchain maybe is not the best for those use cases, but it's best for other types of use cases. Indeed. That are really different. So as social science researchers, I think our role now is more important than ever in identifying potentials of technology.
Indeed, indeed. I think, is it Sweden which has implemented this kind of a high trust system with the tax filing of their citizens, where an SMS goes out to eligible citizens saying, do you agree with the tax filing? And the citizen replies back, yes. And that's the end of the tax filing. Eligible citizens, that is. Is it Sweden or is it Denmark, Professor Rony?
I'm not so familiar with the Swedish tax system, but living in Denmark, both from a research point of view, but also because I pay taxes in Denmark, I know that the principle of Danish taxation online system is to minimize the contact. So you are never asked to input anything unless really necessary, unless they don't have that information. So the idea is inverting the principle of citizen contact with the public agency. The public agency already calculates the tax for you, and only if you want to make some changes because you disagree with that, then you need to log in.
Indeed, indeed. We are at the top of the hour. Professor Yogesh, Dr. Raman, any last thoughts on the use of AI in the public sector?
Well, really, not from my side.
Okay.
Yeah, AI in public sector, I think that was a good session by Professor Rony. Thank you. One big issue with respect to public sector will be accessibility of data, which was mentioned. I think there were examples which are quoted as well. Examples about bots were given and how it is changing, and also the example of hospital data, right? So it is not an easy task to access all data that can be taken for better modeling to happen. That is my view as far as AI's applicability in the government sector is concerned. But yes, thank you, Professor Rony, for giving your time to us and addressing all participants here. And if there are any more queries, I hope you'll be able to answer them if you're going to email that to you, if it is not a problem to you, right? Thank you, Professor Sandeep. I think if there are no more questions, you can conclude the session.
Sure, absolutely. Just before concluding, let me also share that our next lecture in the series will be by Mr. Santosh Mishra, who is the CEO of the Tamil Nadu E-Governance Agency and the Commissioner of E-Governance. Tamil Nadu, Professor Rony, is one of the large states in the south of India. And they operate almost like a private sector enterprise. So Mr. Santosh Mishra will be talking about the public policy challenges of AI in our next session, which will be held on the 10th of March at 12 noon UK time. Once again, Professor Rony, heartfelt thanks for a very lucid narrative on AI in the public sector. Professor Yogesh, Professor Raman, thank you very much for co-hosting this series. A big thank you to our dear participants who logged in and made this session extremely interesting and asked lots of questions. Last but not the least, I would like to thank Mr. Rajesh Bagewadi and our IT team who made available this robust infrastructure, the IT infrastructure. And we also have a student team called iSmart, which actually does all the PR for SIBM Pune, who created all of the flyers. And for each session, within a few minutes, they prepare a few thank you electronic frames, just as a small token of appreciation from SIBM Pune. We'll share that via email, Professor Rony. So with that, we come to the end of today's session. Thank you, everyone, and have a very good evening to all of you.
Thank you, Professor Bhattacharya, for coordinating it so well. And thank you again, Rony, for excellent talk.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure. It was fun. I hope also the audience benefited from our discussion, and I look forward to keeping in touch and hopefully to see all of you in person at some point.
Yeah, look forward to that. Thank you so much. Have a very good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.